Thomas Breakwell was a young Englishman who lived in the southern United States around the beginning of the 1900s. He worked at a cotton mill where he had a very nice job, and he vacationed in Europe. In the summer of 1901, Thomas Breakwell was riding a steamship to Europe when he met a young woman and they talked about spiritual subjects. When they arrived in Paris, she said that she wanted him to come and meet her friend, that she knew that they would have a lot in common. So they went to the friend's apartment in Paris, and the three of them talked for quite a while. When they were leaving, Thomas Breakwell asked the hostess if maybe he could come back tomorrow to talk some more, and she said absolutely and invited him to come back the next morning. Well, the next day, Thomas Breakwell arrived at her home, and his eyes were shining, and he was full of joy and excitement. And the woman asked him to sit down and to tell her what was on his mind. And he took a moment and he looked at her intently. And then he told her that yesterday, when he left her home and he was walking alone on an avenue, and it was quiet and the air was heavy and still, not even a leaf was rustling. It was very quiet and still. And then all of a sudden, this great wind appeared, and Thomas heard a voice that was sweet and powerful. And the voice told him that there was a new message from God. Now the hostess, she asked Thomas, she said to calm down, because she actually knew about this new message from God. For the next several days, she told him everything that she knew about the Baha'i faith, its teachings, its history, and about Abdul-Baha, the perfect exemplar of the faith's teachings, who was alive and living in Akka in the Holy Land. Well, Thomas Breakwell was so full of joy and hope upon learning about these teachings and about this person, Abdul-baha, who was this perfect exemplar of these teachings, that he knew that he had to meet him. Thomas Breakwell was lucky because there was another man in Paris who was going to visit Abdul-baha in Akka, and Thomas Breakwell was able to accompany him. They wrote Abdul-baha and asked for permission, and after a short while they were on their way. Well, when they arrived in Akka and they went to Abdul-baha's house, Thomas Breakwell was taken to a room where there were several other men there having discussions. And Thomas Breakwell felt very sad and despairing because he looked around the room and he couldn't recognize who Abdul-baha was. And he thought that surely his heart would have told him who Abdul-baha was, and now he was afraid that maybe his heart wasn't open enough to recognize this heavenly being. So Thomas Breakwell, he sat down in despair, and at that moment a door opened and there was this shining bright light, and from that light walked through Abdul-baha. Now, Thomas Breakwell recognized his heart's desire immediately and was so overjoyed and glad that his mission and his heart's desire had been fulfilled. Over the next 2 wonderful days, Thomas Breakwell and Abdul-baha spoke. Thomas Breakwell told Abdul-baha about his job at the cotton mill and confessed that children were actually used for labor at his job. And Abdul-baha told him that he would have to resign. And Thomas Breakwell did so immediately. After leaving Akka, he returned to Paris. Now he had no job, he had no income, but his heart was full of joy. He burned like a bright candle. His heart grew ever bigger like a bright candle, shining its light onto all who crossed his path. And because he had no income, Thomas Breakwell had a fairly difficult life and he became very ill, but the illness did not dim his joy. His heart continued to radiate joy and love and hope. He lived his life like a bright candle, giving his light to everyone. And eventually he was overcome by this illness and he passed away. But he did so with great joy. And when Thomas Breakwell passed away, Abdul-Baha revealed a prayer for him. And one of the lines says, "O Breakwell, my dear one, thou hast lit a flame within the lamp of the company on high. Thou hast set foot in the Abha paradise. Thou hast found a shelter in the shadow of the blessed tree. Thou hast attained his meeting in the heaven of heaven."